Okay, good afternoon and welcome to another one of a series of meetings that we're holding here in ODI, which are in and around the topic of the food price spike of 2007-2008 and its repercussions. And today we're going to be looking at the issue of managing better the world food system and addressing the challenges of food security in the 21st century, with particular attention to the UN role. Before we begin, a couple of administrative points. For those needing the lavatories, the men's are down that end of the corridor, the ladies are here, and in the unlikely event there is a fire alarm, the fire exit is in that direction down the stairs that you came up. Now, what do we have for this afternoon? The world food price spike of 2007-2008 took many people unawares, and indeed it's a good question if anybody fully foresaw what was going to happen. But the shock of the food price rise has led to a series of questions being asked. One of those questions is, how do we manage global food systems so that shocks like this either do not happen or are rather rare? How do we coordinate international and public sector responses to events like this? What is it that we should have done in an event like that? And not least, the food price spike has refocused attention on ongoing situations of chronic malnutrition and hunger in the developing world, and those statistics are pretty well known to many of you in the room. We now estimate that 900 million people or more are in situations of undernutrition, and we're always left with those awful child malnutrition statistics of round about a third of children being stunted under the age of 5. So today's meeting is to explore some of these issues of being prepared and how you respond to them, and looking particularly at the role of international public agencies. What we have for you today is our main speaker is Dr. David Nabarro, who coordinates a couple of things. One, he has been coordinating the response to avian flu, but more importantly for today, he is coordinating the high-level task force that the UN Secretary General set up to respond to issues of the food crisis and hunger in general. And we have three discussants, and our three discussants are Fred Mousseau, who is a food policy advisor for Oxfam GB. We have Terry Sach, who is an agricultural advisor to the Africa division of the Department for International Development, and until recently was in policy division in the food group. And we have Simon Maxwell, who directs the institute here. And the running order for this will be that Dr. Nabarro will speak for about half an hour. We'll have about 5 minutes for the various discussants, and then question and answer session. And we will aim to finish by, 2:15?
Thank you.
Dr. Nabarro.
Thanks very much. Simon said to stand up, and I took my jacket off, more because many of you haven't got jackets on. And I thought that I might take my tie off in a minute as well.
Stop there.
So, if I talk like this, am I audible? I just don't know the acoustics of the room. Now, actually to talk for half an hour, it's a long time. And so I shall look very carefully to see if it appears that people are doing Blackberries or sending text messages, and will possibly change gear and ask some questions during the half hour. Because what I want to do is actually to have a dialogue and get some of your advice and comments on this issue. Because when Steve says, could you talk about managing better the world food system and addressing the challenges of food security in the 21st century, I think I have to say back to you that what I've learnt is that global governance and management of food systems is a really tricky issue, that there is probably such a degree of debate and dissent around what food represents for humanity and how internationally it should be handled, that to start to box up what I say in terms of better management is a slightly ambitious way of describing what we're trying to do. But I am going to talk to you about how the Secretary-General has sought himself to respond to the current food crisis and to some of its historical antecedents. And I'm going to try to give you a little bit of insight as to how that process is going and compare it a little bit with what's been going on in the management of the international response to other issues such as climate change, such as major health problems, such as humanitarian responses. Because these are, in a way, not unique. I'm not going to be able to talk much about the financial crisis. I think we're evolving that as we speak. But if Mr. Stiglitz is coming to town, I encourage you to hear him. So, the questions that I was asked to focus on were, how can the world food system be managed better? How can this contribute to reducing hunger and malnutrition, which is a very, very important link. Even the implicit link there is very important in my view. What is the role for international public agencies and the UN in particular, and how can this role be fulfilled? Test me at the end to see whether we've gone down those in a satisfactory way. And what I'd like to do is to talk about the context as it's being defined now, the work of the high-level task force that I'm responsible for coordinating. I'd like to focus down on a meeting that took place in Madrid in January, which was quite an exceptional meeting, and then some of the challenges we face. Not many pictures, but I'm assuming that you don't mind that too much, because I think that the issues need to be as stark as possible. I would argue, and I think that the whole of the task force now argues, that from the perspectives of the 2 billion or so poorest people in the world, the 1/3, food and nutrition systems have been in crisis long before prices shot up in 2008, typo there. That there have been high levels of malnutrition and hunger and increasing numbers of people who are unable to realize their right to food, to access the food they need when they need it. Increasing numbers of people requiring food assistance. The production, processing and distribution systems have not served the interests of small-scale producers, particularly those farming less than half a hectare, or particularly those who are employed as labourers for much or all of the year in agriculture. And the differences between prices paid to producers and prices paid by consumers in many markets were just too great, and the producer got a bad deal. And that increasing volatility in prices and in variations in supplies have created an environment that is particularly difficult in many developing environments, and especially so for the poorest people, the less than $2 a day community. And that the result has been compromising progress towards Millennium Development Goals. And this is the chart that's been developed by FAO's group, led by Assistant Director General Hafiz Ghanem, just using their analyses that show that the proportion of undernourished in the developing world has started to increase in recent years. So in the first half of 2008, the issue, of course, gained a great deal of public attention, and the statistics in the first bullet are well known. The analysis, again, from FAO and WFP through their surveys suggested that rural and urban poor, landless people who worked in agriculture, in particularly, obviously, in cash labour or got paid in produce, and female-headed households, as well as households where there was a disabled person or a person with chronic illness were the worst affected, still are. And that, very importantly, the supply response of producers in developing countries to the opportunity posed by rising prices, which was seen by many ministers of agriculture as a good thing for their farmers, was not very good. That probably because the prices of inputs remain particularly high, that in developing countries the supply response to high prices was rather poor. And if you actually look at it without India and China data in it, the supply response reduced in 2008, for example, compared with 2007. So you can all see the graph in front of you, again the FAO data, but corroborated also by the World Bank, that developed countries showed a substantial supply response in 2008, developing countries marginal, and as I say, if you drill down and look at specific parts of the world, it was a drop. Now, obviously, as time has gone on into 2009, things are a bit more complicated, that some of the developed countries that showed a strong supply response in 2008 are now perhaps showing a less good response because the prices of commodities have fallen so markedly that the situation has changed. Let us see what 2009 brings. But the anecdotal evidence we receive is that in developing countries the situation is even worse now, as partly because credit has got more difficult and partly because of real uncertainties about farm gate prices, producers have actually withheld from planting or have used fewer inputs in their planting in many of the developing regions, and they've been compounded by climatic problems, particularly in Latin America and southern China, and also, of course, as you know, in the Horn of Africa. Now, although world food prices have fallen, the volatility that I describe is not just a temporal volatility, but it's a spatial volatility, i.e., you are seeing variations of price, much greater variations of price, within countries or within continents than was previously the case. And there are still communities who are paying quite large amounts, perhaps around twice or three times of what they were in 2002. And there are also big variations in access and availability. And I think that this notion of volatility and uncertainty around food price and food availability is not only creating a pretty tough time for people, as far as we can understand, but they've also seriously discouraged investment in agriculture. They've also led to a rethinking of a lot of the private investment that has been occurring and which we know is the engine for growth. So, in terms of contributing to an effective management of the response, if I put together what I'm hearing from colleagues within the different high-level task force agencies, I think their broad policy prescriptions, obviously I haven't checked exactly what I'm saying with all of them, but their broad policy prescriptions are along the following lines. Within the current climate, that first of all, that there is a need for national, regional and global movements that bring together private sector, NGO, government, international and regional bodies to improve resilience of households and communities whilst at the same time reducing hunger in the face of a range of potential shocks that are existing now or are likely to come, climatic, financial, water and other related issues, that these should be focused, and in particular we want them to be focused on results not just in terms of increased production but improved access of vulnerable people to the food that they need when they need it, i.e. improved food security, coherence of actions, not just by the UN system, but by this much broader movement of actors, and alignment of programming where this is undertaken by different actors. In Africa, we have very exciting, I believe, movement in this direction through CAADP, the Comprehensive African Agriculture Development Programme, though it's been quite interesting in my recent engagements with the CAADP team from the high-level task force to work with them on the extent to which they're linking together agriculture and production, social protection, food security, nutrition and hunger reduction, as well as access to market and trade, the extent to which the agriculture dialogue is kind of overlapping into other domains that have sometimes not been there, particularly the nutritional domain and particularly the marketing, infrastructure and trade domains. And I think that perhaps this is therefore another key element of when we talk about outcome-focused coherence and alignment, we stress also the need for thinking across in a much more transverse way than before. And I will talk more about this in the second part. The second thing is, in terms of the policy prescriptions, is this need to continue to work on the immediate requirements of people who are food insecure and hungry, whilst at the same time to invest in longer-term resilience of systems in the rural space that requires perhaps a 10 to 20 year perspective rather than a 1 to 2 year perspective. And in our efforts in the high-level task force to sustain that twin track thinking has been a challenge, and it's one that continues to be there, and we'll talk about that. Thirdly, really is therefore necessary to sustain political engagement during the next few months and years in the need to invest in and deliver results on well-functioning food security systems that improve nutrition and reduce hunger. One of our members in the high-level task force is the World Food Programme, whose executive director sees our role as certainly reducing WFP's caseload and ideally helping them go out of business. So for her, well-functioning food security systems are a key. And the second area in which it seems there is general agreement that we need to work on is better smallholder food production and marketing systems that manage risk, drive prosperity, and lead to sustained economic and social development of the rural space. And trying to link between these two for us in the high-level task force remains critical. I believe that what's on this slide would get reasonably good support. It builds on the comprehensive framework for action and seeks to put it into the evolving context that we have now. I'm sure some of you will ask whether or not we'll ask questions about that in greater detail, and I look forward to it. So now I've actually talked to you about this high-level task force, moving from the issues and giving you my personal perspective on the issues based on what I've learned from the high-level task force members. I want to talk to you about this piece of United Nations system working that was put in place in May of 2008 by the Secretary General. It is under the Chief Executives Board of the UN. And those of you who are students of how the UN works will know that the Chief Executives Board is the apex institution that brings together the heads of all the different agencies at chief level. It has a high-level committee on policy, HRCP. It has a high-level committee on management, and it has also the UN Development Group, which is the whole country-level apparatus headed by resident coordinators. These three pillars are underneath the Chief Executives Board. So this is a time-limited entity established under the highest level management group that we have. It's unique. There's been no other coordination effort done quite in this way. Others have used different mechanisms, and it is absolutely time limited. Its current life is until the end of 2009, and it will be for the Chief Executive Board to decide whether it's going to continue. And one could argue that if the different institutions were to be behaving perhaps in different ways, that there wouldn't be any need for this kind of overarching entity. Secondly, I really want to stress to you that it is a UN Chief Executive Board body, so it has not expanded to include significant numbers of non-UN international financial institution or other entities. It does include the World Trade Organization. The OECD are invited to participate in its meetings, but it has been quite fussy about sticking to the CEB imprimatur. I have recommended at times that it be expanded, and that has not been accepted. The UN Secretary General is chair, the FAO DG is vice chair, and there were initially two coordinators designated, John Holmes and myself, to support him, and then John Holmes had to shift on to do his work in humanitarian crises full-time, particularly as things started to get very hot in that arena, and so he asked the Secretary General if he could stop doing it, and I was asked to take over. Now, we are very definitely required not to create any new bureaucratic or intergovernmental layers. We are a creature of the system, but we are to provide the fullest possible concerted support as a task force to national authorities and governments, linking with regional political entities, development banks and economic commissions, and focusing on the twin track, as I've described, with an overarching mandate to improve the way in which our system is addressing Millennium Development Goal 1. And that won't surprise you, because for quite a long time, Millennium Development Goal 1 has been seen to be the one that has received perhaps inadequate concerted attention from our system, particularly the nutritional element of it. And we were asked to bridge short and long-term responses, to bridge the humanitarian and development, which, again, some of you would realize is quite a tough challenge. We produced a manifesto. I call it a manifesto because I believe that that's the best description for what it is. It's a document that describes what we stand for, what we're committed to try to do, where we're trying to get to. It's available in the 6 languages of the UN. We keep running out of copies that we print. It's called the Comprehensive Framework for Action, and it was developed as a means for organizing collective actions within our system in pursuit of both immediate and longer-term outcomes. It does need to be revised because it's very heavily based on the high food price analysis. However, the underpinning prescriptions within it, we believe, are still valid. We also believe, however, that it did not contain sufficient emphasis on the right to food. We believe that it would have been better had we had a more systematic process of engaging different groups of civil society and different member states in writing it. But it was never meant to be a document to be approved by the membership of the UN. It was produced quickly as a manifesto for what we stand for what we're prepared to be called to account against. And that, therefore, explains a little bit why, although it's appropriate for people to criticize the fact that it was done as an internal document, why it was done in that way. It's what we stand for rather than a consensus that has been negotiated with a lot of other stakeholders. I just want to be clear that it does very definitely spell out the two halves of the puzzle, the immediate needs and then the longer-term ambitions, and it focuses down on emergency food assistance, smallholder farming, trade and tax policies, and of course some macroeconomic support for the countries that have had to sustain some kind of fiscal pressure as a result of dealing with the impact of the food crisis. But importantly, it includes a lot on longer-term aspects of agricultural development, of trade changes, and also expresses an anxiety about the impact of biofuel production, which is still needs to be taken seriously, and we still consider should receive attention, even though the environment has changed so much. Now, what has happened since the Comprehensive Framework for Action was written was that the high-level task force as a whole has developed a programme of work. And this, again, is part of accountability, things against which, as a collective, we are prepared to be called to account, but things that we're also, as a group, going to work on. This was agreed through a fairly intensive negotiation over 2 or 3 months, and again had to cope with the slightly shifting environment within which we're working. But the fundamental focus was getting the system to support what's happening in countries in a more coherent way, responding to requests from national authorities with coordinated policy support and technical assistance, with a focus on capacity building and mobilization of resources, working initially with a broad group of 60 countries and focusing down on 27 countries, and very definitely using as part of our trigger for country engagement the request from the European Commission that we work together with them on the €1 billion commitment, and then at all times trying to stimulate systematic links between knowledge, policies and investments by the agencies so that we sought to respond most effectively to what is happening.
Now, $1 billion wasn't happening.
It is happening, yeah. Just to a slightly longer term. Please do interrupt at regular intervals.
So could you also say something about the Spanish billion as well?
Yeah, there is more money in the margins. Good, thank you, Terry. There will be more money coming, and I can now come back to my segue to the second part of the programme of work, which is to advocate for the funds that are needed for both urgent actions and long-term investment. We are increasingly recognising that the right to food, nutritional needs, and the absolute need to reduce vulnerability have to be at the core of the advocacy because of the shifting environment within which we're working, and because of the increasing importance given by member states and civil society to the right to food. We are splitting our advocacy into 2 distinct but clear parts. One is the fact that it looks as though 2009 for the World Food Programme and for other providers of assistance is going to be at least as bad a year as 2008, and there is real anxiety about whether it's going to be possible to raise the amounts which are probably around 10 or 11 billion of the total envelope that is going to be needed for food assistance, so that has to be given high priority, bearing in mind that the business model of the World Food Programme is evolving at a very rapid rate, and so we no longer can refer to its work just in terms of food assistance, but also that we need to advocate for investments in longer-term resilience, particularly around smallholder agricultural productivity and markets, an area that is much less easy to raise money for, but for which there has been a welcome suggestion of new resources coming on board, $1 billion pledged by the government of Spain, some money as yet unknown coming from a number of countries in the Middle East and North Africa, some money from the Republic of Korea, and also potentially additional resources coming from some European and North American countries. This is still not clear whether or not this is going to translate into actual money, and we have quite a lot of difficulty at the moment in understanding whether or not money will end up going into broader vulnerability reduction programming, or whether there will be a recognition that one of the core ways of reducing vulnerability is to focus on the needs of the 400 to 500 million smallholders who themselves have the potential to be the engine for growth and resilience in many countries. You're writing doodles, not notes. Checking to see what he's going to say when he... Third thing is to make sure that the political attention is at the highest possible level. It was a star shape around the hole in his ring pad. Because, this is a subject that has had its moment in the political limelight after truly being out of political focus for 20 or 30 years. Are we going to lose it in a flash? And it's not just about agricultural production, it is about food security, it is about the rural space. It is about resilience and social protection. So we have to continue to get that right. I heard yesterday that food security will not now be a chapter in the DFID white paper. Well, okay, perhaps these things don't matter so much, but I think that it's interesting to try to understand what is the rationale for thinking this through. There will be some who will argue that without food, other needs are not very important. And then the fourth thing that we really must do, and this is urgent, is we must get financial support for food security better coordinated between different organisations in the high-level task force, because we have been told that unless we can coordinate our finance better, we are not going to be able to get these additional funds. This is Spain, this is the Middle Eastern countries that the Secretary General is speaking to, and they are saying it would be quite nice if there was one place that received the money and one system that distributed the money, but we have also been encouraged very strongly not to develop a new vertical fund for food security, and so we are trying very hard as a result of discussions that took place in and around Madrid and subsequently to get the system so that it behaves in a more integrated way without creating a vertical fund. Some challenge. Third thing we're doing is trying to make sure that there is a continued and broader engagement in this issue by particularly the transversality between nutrition, food security, agriculture, by disseminating the comprehensive framework for action, by building and sustaining links with stakeholders, and by providing support for the processes which are conversations, debate and convergence to establish a partnership for agriculture, food security and nutrition. Now, this will eventually, we believe, become a global partnership, but the consultations that are underway have to happen at local level, national level and regional level. It's no way that this is going to just be fixed through some kind of global intergovernmental dialogue, and we are now very much involved in trying to ensure that the two parts go ahead. And last part is, it is our commitment to ensure accountability of the high-level task force members using the comprehensive framework for action as a basis by mapping issues, tracking progress, synthesizing data, by engaging with other issues who monitor progress, and by contributing to an annual report that is to be prepared by the Secretary General for this year's General Assembly. We have a tiny secretariat. We will have a network with about 100 to 200 members. It's currently rather smaller, through which we will seek to maintain communications. And we will seek also to ensure that there are focus teams dealing with issues. But as I've said before, we're not setting up a new agency and we're transient. There are a number of next steps that I'd like to talk about, but I'm going to not go on at this stage because I believe that it is now time to have time for discussion and questions. And then at the end, if I get a chance on the questions, next steps to do with the financial coordination mechanism and partnership, I'd be delighted to focus on, but I'd rather hear from you before I go into that detail. Thank you very much.
Sorry, was that a very specific question?
It is a specific question. As FAO's Public Information Officer here in London, one thing that I saw missing here, perhaps you just didn't address it, is how do people get to know about it? Because, you know, I didn't see any mention of an information program, the media. I mean, you really need to bring everyone on board with it. I recall the tremendous success we had with avian influenza because it made the front pages day after day after day, and now it's kind of fallen off. And here we have this new big project that you are heading up. Any chance you're going to do the same kind of thing with that?
So, shall I just answer the questions or not?
Just answer that question and we'll go to the discussions.
This is very different from avian influenza. It's an utterly different issue, paradigm and process. My job here is much more to be inside the engine room, doing up loose nuts, adjusting the way the engine works, and ensuring that the different elements of the system are effective. It's much more important for us that Mr. Diouf or Ms. Sheeran, or the Ngozi perhaps, or the Mr. Strauss-Kahn of the IMF or others are themselves speaking out about these issues, rather than having any kind of publicity for a process that it is designed to make the system work more efficiently. So this is truly about process within the system to enable it to be more effective. And I think that we have to be very careful from our side not to be embarking in anything in the way of public information that doesn't come from either the heads of these agencies or, when appropriate, from the Secretary General. But I'd be delighted to talk more about this. This is certainly the view of the Vice Chair of the Task Force.
But I was just thinking of the difficulty coordinating all of these UN organizations when it comes to public information, and wondering if there was any possibility.
We are certainly.
How that might be.
This is absolutely a key thing that we're looking at the moment, especially as now messaging is particularly important, and the Department of Public Information are dealing with this. Again, I think it's best that I talk to you a little bit about the specifics of this later.